You know how sometimes a smell can take you right back to a moment? For me, it's WD-40, grease and metal. My grandmother's garage smelled like that, and to this day if I catch a whiff of it in some hardware store I have to stop what I'm doing for a second. That garage is where my whole life changed, and it happened over something as dumb as a squeaky bike chain. I'm Danny. I was 22 that summer back living with my grandmother Opal for 3 months while I saved up for my own place. My parents had moved to Arizona the year before and I didn't want to go with them, so Grandma Opal's house in Ohio became my landing pad. She never asked too many questions. She just made space for me, put clean sheets on the bed in what used to be my uncle's room, and told me to help myself to whatever was in the fridge. What she didn't know, at least I thought she didn't know, was that I'd been seeing someone for 4 months. His name is Theo. We met at the community pool where I was lifeguarding back when he came every single day for 2 weeks straight, even though, and he admitted this to me later, he can barely swim. I just wanted an excuse to keep looking at you, he told me on our third date, laughing so hard at himself he nearly choked on his water. Theo is loud in a way I am not. He talks with his hands. He forgets to lower his voice in public and then gets embarrassed about it, which somehow makes it worse because then he laughs loudly about being loud. I used to think I liked quiet, controlled people. It turned out I liked him instead. We kept things low-key that summer, mostly meeting at his apartment or driving out to the reservoir where nobody we knew would see us. Not because I was ashamed, because I genuinely did not know how my family would take it, and Grandma Opal was the wild card I was most scared of. She's 76. She goes to church every single Sunday without fail, even in a snowstorm. She keeps a framed photo of Ronald Reagan next to one of my late grandparents on the mantle, which honestly should tell you everything you need to know about her politics. I loved her more than almost anyone in the world, and I was terrified of her. So that Tuesday afternoon when Theo showed up to help me fix the chain on my old 10-speed, I figured we were safe. Grandma had a hair appointment. She wasn't due back until 5. Except her appointment got canceled. The stylist had a family emergency. Grandma came home at 2:15 instead, and neither of us heard her car pull in because the garage door was down and we had the radio going, some classic rock station she always kept the dial on. I remember exactly what was happening. Theo had grease on his hands and somehow got a smear of it on my cheek, right near my mouth, and I was laughing telling him to get it off, and he leaned in saying, "Hold still, let me just," and instead of wiping it off he just kissed me. Right there, grease and all. That's when the door from the kitchen into the garage creaked open. I heard it before I processed what it meant. By the time I turned around, Grandma Opal was standing in the doorway with her purse still over her arm and her church cardigan on, looking at the two of us. Theo froze with his hand still on my jaw. I remember thinking, in some detached corner of my brain, that we probably looked ridiculous, two grown men standing over a bike with grease on our hands and our mouths still close together. Nobody said anything for what felt like an actual minute, but was probably 4 seconds. Then Grandma Opal set her purse down on the little shelf by the door, the same spot she always put it, like this was any other Tuesday, and she said, "Well, that chain's been squeaking for a week. Glad somebody's finally doing something about it." And she walked past us into the garage, toward the old chest freezer, and started rooting around for something. I stood there completely stunned. Theo's hand had dropped from my face and neither of us could figure out what to do with our own bodies. I actually said out loud, kind of stupidly, "Grandma." She didn't even look up. "You're gonna introduce me to your friend, or should I guess his name?" "This is Theo," I said. My voice came out about an octave higher than usual. She turned around then and looked him over. This 76-year-old woman in her Sunday cardigan sizing up a 23-year-old man with grease on his hands standing in her garage. Theo, God bless him, stuck his clean hand out to shake before realizing both his hands were covered in bike grease. And he made this face, this genuinely mortified face, and wiped his palm on his jeans before trying again. "It's really nice to meet you, ma'am," he said. "I'm sorry about that, Don't apologize for the grease in the garage," she said. "That's what garages are for." Then she pulled 2 frozen pot pies out of the freezer, looked at them, put one back, and said, "You staying for dinner?" That was it. That was her entire reaction. She went back inside to preheat the oven like nothing had happened, and I stood in that garage with my heart absolutely hammering, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I want to be honest with you, Part of me almost wished she'd yelled. At least yelling I understood. I had scripts in my head for yelling. I'd rehearsed in the shower in the car what I'd say if she ever found out and got upset. I had none of that for casual pot pie logistics. Was that, Theo whispered, good? Was that a good reaction? I have no idea, I whispered back. We finished the chain in near silence after that, both of us shaken in this weird, quiet way, like we'd braced for impact and instead just kept falling. Dinner was somehow worse than I expected and also nothing like what I expected. Grandma Opal talked about her church's building fund. She asked Theo where he grew up, and when he said Youngstown she said her sister lived there for 30 years and did he know the Kowalski family, and he said no, and she said, well, small world anyway, which made no sense given that he just said no. But that's how her conversations always went, little tangents that led nowhere in particular. She did not mention the kiss, not once, not a raised eyebrow, not a loaded pause, nothing. Theo left around 8 and I walked him out to his car, and we stood there in her driveway not really knowing what to say to each other. I think that went okay, he said, like he was asking me to confirm a math problem. I think so, I don't know, she's never like this quiet about things. She has opinions about the weather, Theo. She has opinions about how I load the dishwasher. He kissed me goodnight, quick, glancing back at the house like he expected the porch light to start blinking or something. It didn't. The house just sat there, lit up warm and normal like every other Tuesday of my whole childhood. I went back inside and Grandma was in the living room with the TV on low, some game show. And she had her reading glasses pushed up into her hair even though nothing in her lap needed reading. Sit down for a second, she said. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Here it comes, I thought. Here's where she says what she actually thinks. I sat on the arm of the couch, not the couch itself, like I needed an exit route. She muted the TV. You've been quiet these past few months, she said. Quieter than usual, I mean, you get like that when you're carrying something. I didn't mean to be weird about it, I said. I just wasn't sure how you'd. How I'd do what? React. She was quiet for a second, turning her glasses over in her hands. You thought I'd throw you out of my house. It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. I didn't know, I really didn't. You go to church every Sunday. You've got Reagan on the mantle. I didn't have a lot to go on. She actually laughed at that, a short surprised sound. Reagan's on the mantle because your grandfather liked him and I never got around to taking it down. Doesn't mean I agree with everything the man ever said or did. She set her glasses down on the side table. You know I had a sister. Aunt Ruth, yeah, she passed before I was born. Not Ruth, before Ruth, there was another sister, Vivian. I actually did not know that. In 22 years, nobody had ever once mentioned a great Aunt Vivian. Vivian was 11 years older than me, Grandma said. When I was your age, she was already gone from the family, cut off. My parents didn't talk about her, didn't allow her name in the house, took down every photo that had her in it. When I was a kid, I didn't understand the whole story for a long time. I just knew one day she was there and the next day she wasn't, and asking about her got you sent to your room. Why was she cut off? Grandma Opal looked at me for a long moment before she answered. She fell in love with a woman named Constance. They lived together in Mansfield for almost 40 years. My parents called it Vivian's situation if they called it anything at all. I didn't see my own sister again until 1988 at our mother's funeral, and even then half the family acted like she'd walked in off the street, like she was a stranger. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there on the arm of the couch absorbing this. I always regretted that I didn't fight harder for her when I was young, Grandma Opal went on. I was scared of my own parents, same as you were scared of me tonight, and I let that fear decide things for me. I told myself there was nothing I could do. I was wrong about that. There's always something you can do, even if it's small. So today in the garage. Today in the garage I decided I wasn't going to be the reason you were scared in your own home, she said. I don't fully understand everything about how the world's changed since I was young, Danny. I'll be honest, some of it I'm still working through in my own head. But I know how it felt to lose my sister over something that was none of my business to begin with, and I'm not doing that again. Not to you. I felt my throat go tight, the kind of tight where you know if you try to talk you might actually cry, and I hadn't cried in front of my grandmother since I was maybe 9 years old. You could have just said all that in the garage, I managed, instead of asking about the pot pies. She actually smiled at that, this small, dry smile. I needed a minute to get my feet under me. You don't get to be 76 years old without learning that sometimes the right words take a little while to find. pot pies bought me time. I laughed and it came out half sob and she reached over and patted my knee once, the same way she used to when I was a kid and skinned it falling off my bike. Bring him around more, she said. Theo, he seems like he laughs easily. I like that in a person. I want to tell you the story ends there, warm and tidy, but that's not exactly true, and I don't want to give you the neat version because the real version matters more to me. Because 2 weeks later my dad called. I still don't know exactly how he found out. I have my suspicions it was my cousin Marissa, who'd been over for Sunday dinner and picked up on something in the way Grandma talked about Theo, something too warm, too specific for a friend. Whatever the source, my dad called me on a Thursday night while I was at Theo's apartment, and his first words were, "Your grandmother tells me you've got a boyfriend." Not hostile exactly, just flat, careful in a way that made my chest tighten. "I do," I said. "Theo, I was going to tell you and Mom eventually, I just wanted to figure some things out first." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear the TV in the background at his end, some sports commentator's voice muffled. "I need some time with this," my dad said finally. "I'm not going to pretend I don't, but I'm not your grandmother's generation and I'm not my own father either. Give me some time and don't disappear on us in the meantime, okay?" It wasn't the reaction I'd been dreading, the door-slamming, disowning nightmare I'd built up in my head for years. But it also wasn't the pot pie moment. It was somewhere messier in between, somewhere real people actually live, and I remember hanging up the phone and just sitting on Theo's couch feeling wrung out in a way I couldn't fully explain. "How'd it go?" Theo asked, sitting down next to me, close but not touching, giving me room. "He needs time," I said. "That's what he said, he needs time." "Time's not right," Theo said carefully. I know that logically, it still feels like standing on a floor that might not hold my weight." He didn't try to talk me out of the feeling. He just put his arm around me and let me sit there with it, which honestly meant more than any reassurance would have. My father's time turned out to be about 5 weeks. 5 weeks where our phone calls got shorter and more careful, where he'd ask about my job and my car and skip past anything that touched on Theo. And I told myself that was fine, that was progress, that not everyone gets to have the garage moment. Then, out of nowhere, in early September, he called and asked if Theo and I wanted to come down to Arizona for Thanksgiving. "Your mother wants to meet him," he said. Then, after a pause that felt like it cost him something, he added, "So do I." I found out later, much later, that it was actually Grandma Opal who called him, not to lecture him, not to guilt him. She told me herself, months after the fact, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of her. "I told your father about Vivian," she said. "Told him the whole thing, same as I told you. Told him I wasn't going to watch history repeat itself in my own family a second time, not while I was still breathing and had a say in it. I didn't tell him what to feel. Feelings aren't something you can order a person into. But I told him what it cost us, losing Vivian the way we did, and I let him sit with that. I think about that a lot. How one conversation in a garage rippled out into a phone call 5 weeks later, into a Thanksgiving invitation, into an entire family slowly, imperfectly, rearranging itself around a truth I'd been so afraid to hand them. Thanksgiving in Arizona was awkward in the specific way that first meetings with in-laws are always a little awkward, no matter your family's politics. My mom hugged Theo a beat too long, the kind of hug that's trying to prove something to itself. My dad shook his hand and called him young man, which made Theo bite back a laugh because he's 23, not exactly young man territory, but he let it go graciously. There was one uncomfortable moment at dinner when my Uncle Pete made some comment that wasn't quite a joke and wasn't quite not one, and the table went silent, and my dad, my actual father, was the one who said, "Pete, not at this table," in a voice that ended the conversation completely. I looked at Theo across the table and he looked back at me, and neither of us said anything, but I think we were both thinking the same thing. This wasn't the fantasy version. Nobody made a speech. Nobody cried happy tears into the mashed potatoes. It was just a family slowly and clumsily making room, one dinner at a time. Grandma Opal didn't come to that Thanksgiving. Arizona was too far for her to travel that time of year, she said, though I suspected it was more that she didn't love flying than any real barrier. But she called that night, after everyone had gone to bed and I was sitting out on my parents' back patio with Theo, both of us wrapped in a blanket against the desert cold. "How'd it go?" she asked, no greeting, straight to business like always. Better than I thought, worse than I hoped, about what you'd expect honestly. That's most things in life, she said. Better than you thought, worse than you hoped, and somehow still worth having gone through. I asked her that night why she'd never told anyone about Vivian before. Not me, not my dad, not in 22 years of my life had her name come up once. She was quiet on the line for a second. Some griefs you carry so long you forget you're carrying them until somebody hands you a reason to set them down, she said. You gave me that reason, standing there in my garage with grease on your face. I looked at you and Theo and I thought, I'm not doing to this boy what my parents did to my sister. Whatever else I don't understand, I understand that much. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just told her I loved her, and she said it back, quick and a little embarrassed, the way she always was with that kind of thing, like sentiment was a coat that didn't quite fit her but she'd wear it anyway when it mattered. Theo and I are still together, by the way. It's been almost 3 years now since that afternoon in the garage. We moved in together last spring, a little 2-bedroom place about 20 minutes from Grandma Opal's house, close enough that we have dinner with her most Sundays after her church lets out. She's gotten used to Theo's laugh filling up her kitchen. Last month she actually asked him to teach her how to make the pierogies his grandmother used to make, and the two of them spent an entire Saturday afternoon covered in flour, and I sat at the table just watching them, thinking about how none of this was guaranteed. How easily it could have gone the other way. I found a photo of Vivian a while back, going through a box of Grandma's old things while helping her clean out the attic. Black and white, a little worn at the corners. A woman in her 30s laughing at something off camera next to another woman I assume was Constance, their shoulders touching. I asked Grandma if I could have a copy made and she said yes without hesitation, and now it sits on our mantle, next to a photo of me and Theo from our trip to the lake last summer. Two couples, 60 years apart in the same family, on the same shelf. One of them never got the garage moment, never got the pot pies, the quiet grace of somebody deciding on the spot not to let fear win. I think about her sometimes, Vivian, a woman I never met, whose whole 4 decades of love got treated like a family secret instead of a family joy. And I think about how close I came to losing something the same way, not through any villain, no dramatic betrayal, just through the ordinary, quiet cowardice of assuming the worst about people before giving them the chance to surprise you. My grandmother surprised me. Standing in that garage with grease on my face and my boyfriend's hand still warm against my jaw, she looked at the two of us and chose, right there, to be different from the family that raised her. She chose it in the space of about 4 seconds, and then she spent the rest of that evening and the rest of the years since proving that it wasn't a fluke. It was a decision she kept making over and over, every Sunday dinner, every phone call to my father, every flower-covered Saturday with Theo in her kitchen. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if her hair appointment hadn't got canceled that day. If she'd come home at 5 like she was supposed to, and Theo and I had cleaned up and put everything away and she'd never known, not that day anyway. Maybe I'd have told her eventually. Maybe I wouldn't have, not for years, the way some people carry that particular fear around for a lifetime, waiting for a perfect moment that never quite arrives on its own. I'm glad the appointment got canceled. I'm glad the chain was squeaking. I'm glad Theo got grease on my face and decided to kiss it instead of wipe it away, and I'm glad my grandmother walked in at exactly that unrepeatable second, because it forced a truth into the open that might otherwise have stayed folded up and hidden for far too long. She still keeps that photo of Reagan on the mantle next to my grandfather's picture. She never did take it down. But now it sits there next to Vivian and Constance, next to me and Theo, this strange little gallery of a family finally telling the truth about itself, one photograph at a time. Last Sunday over dinner, she caught me watching her while she laughed at something Theo said, flour still on her hands from the pierogies, and she looked over at me and just said, "What?" "Nothing," I said, "just glad you came home early that day." She knew exactly what I meant, she always does. She just picked up her fork and said, "Eat your dinner before it gets cold," which is her way of saying almost anything that matters too much to say directly. And that, more than any big dramatic speech, is what love from her has always looked like. Quiet, practical, showing up in the shape of a pot pie, a flower-covered Saturday, a phone call to a scared son. A photograph finally allowed back onto a mantle after 60 years in the dark. I used to think the scariest moment of my life would be the moment someone caught us. It turned out it was actually the beginning of the best part.